Russia has vetoed a draft resolution at the United Nations Security Council that called on Sudan's warring parties to cease hostilities immediately.
The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
14 other countries voted in favour of the measure, drafted by Britain and Sierra Leone, making Russia the only member to vote against the proposal. Along with calling for a ceasefire, the resolution aimed to secure humanitarian aid and safe passage for civilians. The United Kingdom slammed Russia's veto, prompting the Russian ambassador to accuse the UK of meddling in Sudanese affairs.
One country is the blocker. One country is the enemy of peace. This Russian veto is a disgrace, and it shows to the world yet again Russia's true colours. I asked the Russian representative, in all conscience, sitting there on his phone, how many more Sudanese have to be killed?
We believe that the Security Council's role here is to help Sudan to achieve a ceasefire. However, this should not be done by imposing upon the Sudanese, through a council decision, the opinion of its individual members with their post-colonial flavourings.
Since the war erupted in 2023, Sudan has faced severe hunger and famine. Nearly 11 million people have been displaced, and there's widespread reports of violence against civilians. The UN says nearly 25 million people, or half Sudan's population, need urgent aid. UNICEF's Sudan representative, Sheldon Yett, says the scale of the humanitarian crisis is unprecedented.
I've worked in war zones all around the world for over 20 years, and I haven't seen anything quite like what we're seeing in Sudan today. And if you watch the network news, you see no news on Sudan. But we're seeing millions of children, millions and millions of children displaced, many of them displaced multiple times. We're seeing famine in this country. We're seeing outbreaks of disease, of cholera, of measles. We're seeing untold suffering here. I haven't been anywhere with the size of this, the magnitude of this humanitarian catastrophe. It's really every corner of this country.
And Sheldon, you're on the ground there. What do you see in terms of how children are being affected by the armed conflict?
They're affected every imaginable way. We have massive scale of sexual violence. We have children who are malnourished. We have famine here. Famine is a very rare condition. The fact that we have multiple places in this country that have famine tells you something. We have a massive cholera outbreak. We've got war in every corner of this country, and we've got children who are forced to flee from displaced camp to displaced camp, sometimes forced to flee out of the country. I met one girl, Hamida, who said she left 3 times, who had to move 3 times because the front lines kept changing. She took shelter with one family, had to go with another family, and then had to go with a third family. And of course, this girl belongs in school. She doesn't belong in an IDP camp.
Malnutrition was an issue in Sudan even before this conflict. Where are aid agencies focusing their efforts?
Well, we're focusing our efforts in those parts of the country that are most affected by the war. Darfur, Kordofan's, 2 regions of the country in the south that are particularly affected. But we have pockets of famine also around the capital, Khartoum, and elsewhere. Wherever you have conflict, wherever you have markets that cease to function, you have malnutrition and you can have famine. There's plenty of food in Sudan. It's not a question of a lack of food. It's a question of markets not functioning. It's a question of people not being able to get to the market. It's a question of families not being able to do and not being able to act as they normally would because of warfare.
Malaria remains a leading cause of childhood mortality in Sudan. Now, UNICEF is a part of this malaria vaccination campaign. How is the rollout going 2 weeks in?
You know, it's going very well. Sudan is one of the first countries on the continent that have been able to use this new vaccine. And we're very proud to be able to work with the Ministry of Health, be able to work with local NGOs to ensure that children are safe from this disease. As you might imagine, in this environment, immune systems are weak. Children are not getting the nutritional support they require, and hence they're far more vulnerable to the disease. This vaccine protects children from the disease. It's incredibly important that we're able to roll out this vaccine and this campaign. We've just started. It will take many weeks to go. And we have to negotiate every step of the way to make sure we can get into those communities. We look forward to continuing this campaign.
You mentioned cholera, and it continues to spread there. What are the official numbers and how accurate do you think they are?
Well, I mean, the numbers keep growing, and they keep going in spikes in one area, they go down, they go back up again. The numbers, we're literally talking thousands and thousands of people who have the disease. And of course, you have a population on the move, and hence the disease is on the move. So just when you think you are free of the disease in one community, it pops up in another community. It's really like whack-a-mole when it comes to cholera. It's an easy disease to address, to fix, but you have to have access to the population. You have to have good water and sanitation. You have to have good hygiene. You have to be able to get the messages out. And most importantly, you have to have the cooperation of all armed groups, all parties to the conflict. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to nip this disease, this outbreak in the bud.
Where you are in Port Sudan, I understand the schools have recently reopened. Can you tell us about the circumstances surrounding that and also what difference schooling is making amid an armed conflict and health crises?
We talk about famine, we talk about protection crises, we talk about cholera, but we don't talk enough about education. 80% of the children in Sudan are not in school. This is the largest education emergency in the world right now. In some states, such as where I am right now in Port Sudan, some children have been able to go back to school. State governments have been able to use what limited resources they have to pay frontline teachers to ensure schools can reopen, and that's a wonderful thing. Schools, of course, are critical for learning, but they're also an essential protection environment. Children are safe in schools. It's not just the ABCs and the mathematics. It's a protective environment that schools provide. That's why it's essential that we get more schools open.
This is called the Forgotten War. What do you want people here in Australia to understand about it?
I think it's important to understand just the scale of this crisis. We have some 25 million people who are affected by this conflict here. That's roughly the population of Australia. I mean, if you imagine every person in your country who is either malnourished, not getting access to clean water, sanitation, or subject to violations of sexual violations or other violations, that's what we're facing in Sudan. It really is an extremely massive crisis, a crisis that gets no attention. We're all focusing on the Middle East, on Ukraine, and rightly so. Those crises deserve our attention. But we can't forget Sudan. If we forget Sudan, the crisis will continue to spill outside these borders, and we'll have a much larger catastrophe on our hands.
Sheldon Yett, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.